Folks, this is Coach Corbin, and as many of my listeners know by this time, I have changed the name of my podcast to The True American. Many of you by this time, you've heard the history of that, but The True American was the name of a abolitionist newspaper founded by Cassius Clay. Yes, I said Cassius Clay. And Cassius Clay was a Republican, a Kentucky politician, and what many characterize as a radical abolitionist. That man was deadly serious about seeing that slavery was removed from American soil, because in his view, that to be a slaveholder is not to be a true American. So that was the name of his newspaper, The True American. It's the name of my podcast, The True American. And bringing this brother on, that's probably one of the best ways you can describe him, a true American. If you want to understand American values, history, you better go to this brother, because he's rare. Now, brother, your election, isn't it coming up soon?
Yes, the primary is May 17th, Republican primary, and there's no Democrat running. So basically, whoever wins the Republican primary will be the representative for District 36.
Fantastic. And you feel pretty confident about being able to pull that off, winning?
Well, I'm certainly giving it my best shot. I feel like I've got a real good chance, but still have to convince enough people to pick my name off a list. It's about earning that name recognition, getting out and meeting enough people that they know who to vote for.
And I tell you one thing, speaking to my listeners, folks, we need more thoughtful politicians like this brother. I always get the impression when you speak to a lot of elected officials, they know the sound bites, they know the trigger points, but if you actually just sat down with them and asked them like basic questions, thoughtful questions, they're gonna stumble and stutter. This brother can sit down and like on 1 or 2 points about the United States of America, he can sit there and give you a whole lecture. And that's the kind of brothers we need in the Kentucky legislature. Like some of those guys. Who was this one guy? Henry Clay.
Yeah.
Folks like that. That's what we need. And that's what we have if you put someone like him in office. But anyway, let me get off that. I don't want people to think I'm endorsing you or anything like that, but I will say this. I will be running up and down Broadway if you win.
All right.
So,
appreciate it.
Brother, I have you on. We only got so much time. I always try to keep my interviews 15 to 20 minutes. What is this bill I've heard about that's in the Kentucky legislature dealing with transgender athletes? Educate us, brother.
Okay, well, there's a couple of bills in the legislature. I think there's a House Bill 23 and a Senate Bill 83, I think, cover the same subject matter regarding participation in sports by transgender athletes. But before I talk about that, let me back up a little bit to the 1960s. I was born in the 60s. I was an athlete in Texas. And along around 1972, about 50 years ago, some federal legislation that came to be known as Title IX was passed. Mm-hmm. What Title IX essentially did was it told people receiving federal funds that they needed to have equivalent funding for boys and girls sports for scholarship opportunities. Previous to that, in the 50s and 60s, college scholarships for athletics were largely a male thing. But with some of the civil rights movement and movement for gender equality, they said, hey, girls play sports too. They should have an equal chance with the boys to go to college. Now, granted, the girls' sports don't make as much revenue. Men's college football, college basketball are the huge revenue leaders, but nonetheless, an equivalent number of female athletes were going to be given college scholarship opportunities as male athletes. And that had an impact on me starting college I was on the track team in college, believe it or not, shot put, not running. I want to clarify that. But there were not as many male scholarships given out in 1979 because they had to make room in the budget for an equivalent number of female student athletes. And that was some important legislation. My mother played a little bit of college basketball 100 years ago, and there were no such thing as scholarship opportunities for girls at that time. But starting in 1972, there were increasing numbers, and there's a tremendous number of girls' college scholarship athletic opportunities. Now, the reason they were separated out in 1972 is when you had a handful of women that tried to play co-ed sports, but it's just a genetic fact that males are bigger, faster, stronger, have more lung capacity, more red blood cells, all kinds of athletic factors that an objective scientific test give them an advantage in sports over females. There are a handful of sports where that may not be a factor, like say archery, curling, things like that. That there are sports are co-ed; anybody can participate. But for the things that involve strength, speed, stamina, the ability to absorb collisions, boxing, things like that, a huge advantage of males over females. And typically in a given sport, like say track, the world's champion female athlete, the world record holder, couldn't even place in a tournament with, fairly more average college male athletes. So that's the reason that Title IX was to protect women and to give women an opportunity to participate in athletics on an equal footing with men in terms of federal funding, college scholarships, and the things that being a student athlete are supposed to be about, which are going to school, playing athletics, getting your education paid for as a result of that. So that's been the law of the land here for about 50 years, and it changed the shape of college athletics. And as a consequence, high schools changed their athletic programs because more and more girls said, hey, I want to go to college and get a volleyball scholarship or a field hockey scholarship, track scholarship, something of that nature. So that proceeded along quite well for decades. And then we've had this recent social phenomenon about transgenderism. And now we have the situation where biological males, people who are born boys, have an X and a Y chromosome. They have had testosterone their entire life. They've got heavier musculature, heavier skeletons, more aerobic capacity. They decide at some point in their high school or college career that they're going to start dressing like a female, identify as a female, and go participate in female sports. And what happens is they immediately start dominating the field. We've got this swimming athlete that was born a biological male that has blown away all the female records in swimming. And what this does, this is not a victory for the biological male who identifies as a female. This is a defeat for females in athletics because they're being denied that chance to get that gold medal that they have been seeking all their lives. They're being denied their chance for college scholarship and to compete on equal footing. And the reason that you can tell that is the case is because there are only a tiny number of biological women trying to compete in men's sports. It typically only goes one direction. It's biological men wanting to compete in women's sports where they have a huge advantage. And I don't think it has anything to do with equality or equal treatment under the law. I think it has to do with people are seeking a competitive advantage over those female athletes. In sports like wrestling and boxing, can be extremely dangerous for the females have a bigger, stronger male hitting them. We've had some serious injuries and I believe even a death in an MMA fight by someone who was a biological male competing as a female. So with that in mind, the House and the Senate took up this legislation. And I think House Bill 23 is sponsored by several good representatives. Basically says if you're a biological boy, you can't compete in girls' sports, K through 12 and even on up into college. The Senate version of the bill restricts it a little more. I think it's only grade 6 through 12. But the House bill would be my preference because at all ages, boys have 10 times the amount of circulating testosterone in their system that girls do, and it gives them an enormous athletic advantage. And even being, if you have gender conversion therapy, hormone therapy, it takes years to ever undo the impact of all those years of testosterone. And even then, you're still left with somebody that might be 6'5" and 230 pounds, competing against biological females. It's just not fair. So Title IX, 1972 was all about creating equal opportunity for female athletes with male athletes. Transgender males going into girls' sports wipes all that out. So it's a huge step backwards for women in athletics. And that's why I support that. Someone can identify themselves any way they want to. In America, they can dress however they want to. There's, activities they can participate in that are, open to both sexes. But in the case where being a male gives you a biological advantage, it is just not right to have those males competing in female sports, regardless of how they identify.
Brother, I couldn't agree with you more. And what sort of concerns me, what I don't understand, where I'm confused, is that, once again, folks, what did I say? Reasonable, thoughtful individual. How could you argue against what this brother just said? He's not spewing out hatred. He's not talking about, I hate transgender or anything like that. He's just laid out the facts, period. Talked about the science, period. But yet we have some individuals, brother, this is what I don't get. We have some individuals who are still insisting that, oh no, we should have these males who think they're women competing against women. I just, intellectually, I don't see how they're able to justify something like that when it just so brazenly goes against the science.
Right. And I think the legislation takes you back to the gender that's on your official unaltered birth certificate. You just can't change that biology later in mind. And if you can change it, you can change. If it is changeable, you can change to one gender and then change back in a couple of years if you want to. So when we were born, every cell in my body and your body has an X and a Y chromosome that affects the way that body works. Every cell in a woman's body has two X chromosomes. And it's very different nature. And like I say, if this were really about something else, you would see scores of women wanting to compete in male athletics, and you don't see that because they know they're at a tremendous competitive disadvantage. What you see is biological men wanting to compete in girls and women's sports. And I think as a society, we need to protect women just like Title IX tried to do in 1972 to equalize those opportunities for women in sports. So we're kind of reversing 50 years of progress for women in competing on financially equal footing with males.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good point. I remember when I was in high school and I had a crush on this girl, and she wanted to play basketball. And she had to go out and recruit other girls in the high school. She had to go out, and then those girls had to go out and look for a coach. They wanted to play basketball, but they wanted to play women's basketball. They weren't crazy and foolish and talking about, we want to be on the men's or the boys' basketball team. They wanted their own. Her brother played. Her brother's real good. But she could never outjump her brother. She understood that. She got that. And so I never forgot that because she has such a great desire for that. And then she started dreaming. It was just a dream, brother, about being able to go to college on a basketball scholarship. Nowadays, as you know, there are a lot of women who are able to do that, but what helped pave the way were, that young woman who I had that crush on back in high school. They paved the way for that. And now it's all being
taken away.
Yes, absolutely destroyed and completely eradicated. And then it seems like if a lot of these young ladies speak out about it, all of a sudden they're bigots, they're Nazis, they're evil, they're hateful.
Right. I think, that's what they call an ad hominem attack. You're attacking the person for their policy position. They've got a reasonable policy position, but you're going to start name calling to try to marginalize them. And that's not right. You look at other areas just in men's sports. If you look at boxing, wrestling, MMA, things like that, there's weight classes because it's really not fair for a 280-pound guy to go fight a 120-pound guy in the ring. The little guy may be faster, but if the big guy catches him, it's over.
Yeah, right,
and you occasionally see some superb athletes can go up maybe one or two weight classes, but nobody goes as a flyweight and goes up to heavyweight to compete because they get crushed. And like I say, we actually had a death in women's MMA due to that. A biological male, just caved in the head of a female. Gave her I believe she died from that injury. But,
wow.
So we need to protect women's opportunities in athletics.
Absolutely.
And letting men play in girls and women's sports is not the way to do that.
Right. And brother, and I know other Kentuckians must, feel that way. I mean, do you think it's helpful that Kentuckians who want to protect women's sports, and I think this is really what it's about, protecting women's sports, protecting
Absolutely.
Opportunities for women. Is it helpful that they call their House rep? Or?
Yes, absolutely is. There's a legislative message line that you can call and leave a message for your House rep on those bills. It's House Bill 23.